Catherine White's family has denied her involvement in this horrific crime. She has had 3 children. One is in foster care, another with family. The third is dead.
Sometimes, the most devastating stories begin not with screams, but with silence. Not with a moment of violence, but with months of warnings that no one heard. Before the cameras, before the autopsy, before the headlines, there was a tiny girl, born too soon, fighting to live. And a system, step by step, failing to protect her. This isn't just a story about what happened to Jasmine Rose Robin. It's about what didn't happen. The calls that weren't answered. The bruises that weren't explained. The pleas that came too late. Because Jasmine's life didn't end with one terrible act. It ended after a chain of people chose to look away. Jasmine Rose Robin was born on April 30th, 2018 in Houston, Texas, arriving 11 weeks premature. Weighing just 2 pounds, 15 ounces, she entered the world with fragile lungs and an underdeveloped immune system. Doctors placed her in the neonatal intensive care unit at Memorial Hermann Hospital, where she would remain for the first 72 days of her life. It was a constant fight. Machines kept her breathing, tubes nourished her, nurses monitored her 24/7. But slowly, Jasmine grew stronger. She came off oxygen, began feeding on her own, and hit every fragile milestone a baby born at 29 weeks could hope to reach. Her parents, Jason Robin Jr., 24, and Catherine White, 21, visited often. Jason filmed short clips of her and posted them on Facebook, proudly calling her a little fighter. To outsiders, it looked like a young couple trying their best under difficult circumstances. By July 3rd, doctors felt confident enough to send her home. Jasmine had survived the hardest part, or so everyone thought. But what no one knew then was that Jasmine wasn't going home to safety. She was going home to a history of child abuse allegations, to parents who had already been reported to Child Protective Services, and to a house where warning signs had already begun to multiply. Just weeks before Jasmine's birth, in March 2018, an anonymous call was made to CPS. The report claimed that Jason had physically harmed their 2-year-old son, and that Catherine had pinched the child in areas hidden by clothing. The caller described marks on the child's stomach, arms, legs, and back. CPS opened a case. But when investigators tried to reach the family, they couldn't locate them. There was no response to calls, no confirmed address, and ultimately, no follow-up. The file was closed with one chilling note. Parents uncooperative, unable to locate, no further action taken. Then, in April 2018, just a month before Jasmine was born, Jason was arrested on a felony charge for evading law enforcement. Again, no connection was made between his arrest and the open CPS case. No welfare check, no agency alert, just another missed opportunity. On July 10th, just 1 week after Jasmine came home, her parents took her to a pediatric appointment. The doctor immediately noticed something deeply concerning. Bruising around both of Jasmine's eyes. An injury highly unusual for a newborn. The pediatrician carefully documented it and instructed the parents to take her to the ER. But they didn't. No hospital visit, no call, no follow-up. Just silence. Again, within 4 months, 3 separate red flags had appeared. A CPS report alleging abuse, a felony arrest, a doctor's recommendation for emergency care. Each one, individually, could have prompted action. Together, they should have set off alarms. But they didn't. Just 4 days after Jasmine's pediatrician warned her parents to take her to the emergency room, the warnings were no longer hypothetical. On the morning of July 14, 2018, Jason Robin Jr. and Catherine White rushed their daughter to the ER at Memorial Hermann in Pearland, Texas. They told medical staff that Jasmine had been convulsing and had suddenly gone limp earlier that morning. They claimed to have performed CPR before driving her to the hospital. From the moment she arrived, it was clear to the medical team that something was terribly wrong. Jasmine was pale, unresponsive, and showed no signs of reflex. During initial evaluation, swelling was noticed on her head. Her condition was rapidly classified as critical, and a pediatric trauma alert was issued. Teams of specialists assembled, working urgently to stabilize her. But every new test raised more questions. CT scans revealed that Jazmine's brain had suffered extensive trauma. Her pupils did not respond to light. The damage was so severe that some nurses reportedly stepped out of the room in tears after viewing the scans. Specialists noted abnormalities in her retinas, consistent with oxygen deprivation or increased intracranial pressure. Despite all interventions, Jazmine showed no signs of brain activity. She remained on life support, as the team conducted neurological tests over the following 24 hours. Each one confirmed the worst. By July 15, 2018, Jasmine Rose Robin was pronounced deceased. The attending physicians immediately notified law enforcement. Injuries observed were inconsistent with natural causes, and a formal investigation was launched that day. The ER team followed every required protocol, but emotionally, the staff who had cared for Jasmine in the NICU weeks earlier were devastated. She had gone home stable. Now she was back, beyond saving. Despite the severity of Jasmine's condition and the hospital's report, no arrests were made that day. When detectives interviewed Jason and Catherine, they shared a vague timeline. Jason said Jazmine had trouble feeding at around 2 a.m., became unresponsive, and he performed CPR. She seemed to recover briefly, so they let her sleep. Only later, after she refused 2 more feedings, did they bring her to the hospital, nearly 12 hours after that initial incident. Jason also admitted that it wasn't the first time Jasmine had gone unresponsive. A week earlier, she had allegedly choked during a feeding. He said they revived her on their own. When asked why they hadn't sought medical attention, Jason said they were afraid CPS would get involved. This revelation raised serious red flags. A newborn showing repeated respiratory distress should have triggered emergency intervention. Instead, there was no documentation, no ER visit, and no alert made. As detectives probed deeper, more troubling details surfaced. Both Jason and Catherine had prior contact with CPS. A drug screening during Jason's earlier arrest had tested positive for multiple controlled substances. In a recorded interview, Jason described Jazmine's crying as intolerable. He said it made his ears ring to Kingdom Come, and admitted that it made him physically agitated, though he denied ever intending to harm her. Still, the inconsistencies in their accounts, and their decisions not to seek help, deepened investigators' concerns. At that point, forensic results were still pending. While law enforcement and child welfare authorities began building a case, neither parent was charged. Prosecutors needed conclusive medical evidence before moving forward. That evidence came months later. On May 23, 2019, nearly a year after Jazmine's death, the final autopsy was released. It revealed a pattern of injuries that told a much larger story. Jasmine had sustained dozens of bone fractures in varying stages of healing. Some were recent, others were older, signs of ongoing trauma over a prolonged period. Her skull showed signs of damage. Her internal organs revealed signs of blunt force, and her retinas bore the hallmarks of violent shaking or impact. The conclusion was clear and irrefutable. Jazmine's death was not an accident. It was the result of repeated deliberate harm. The findings prompted immediate legal action. On June 24, 2019, Jason Robin Jr. was arrested and charged with capital murder. The next day, Catherine White was arrested and charged with injury to a child by omission. Prosecutors argued that she had failed to act in Jazmine's defense. Jason was denied bond. Catherine posted $40,000 and was released pending trial. That decision sparked mixed emotions among Jazmine's extended family. Jason's mother, Micah Robin, publicly admitted she struggled to understand what had happened. But she also said accountability was necessary. As this case unfolded, it became a reflection of so many failures, systemic, personal, and cultural. Warnings had been issued. Red flags were raised. But still, no one acted in time to save Jasmine. Jason Robin Sr., Jazmine's grandfather, was direct in his grief. He didn't mince words. "Justice has to be served," he said, "no matter who it is." The loss of Jasmine had shaken the entire family, especially after spending weeks visiting her in the NICU, watching her fight for life. Her death left behind not just silence, but questions. Deep, painful questions no courtroom could fully answer. Prosecutors began reconstructing the timeline. Hospital records, CPS files, police reports, and witness statements, all pointing to a singular truth. Jasmine had endured harm in the one place she should have been safest, home. And someone had known, or should have known. Catherine White's family maintained she hadn't caused her daughter harm, and that she hadn't realized how severe Jasmine's condition had become. They stood by her after her release on bond, portraying her not as an abuser, but as a young mother overwhelmed, uninformed, and ultimately passive when action was needed most.
I miss my granddaughter very, very much, and I do want justice for my granddaughter. The charges against my daughter, I feel, are something that she didn't do, something that she was not involved in.
When Jason Robin began dating Catherine White 4 years ago, White's grandmother was immediately concerned.
He's a drug addict, and we tried to keep Catherine away from him, and it didn't work.
A healthy child.
I called and asked what happened, because she told me she had to rush the baby to the hospital, that she was having convulsions and all, and then that she passed away. And I don't know Jason very well. I just think, I know he does drugs, and I just think he was very unattentive and didn't care.
Her charge reflected that position. Injury to a child by omission. Not for what she did, but for what she didn't do. The case had shifted. No longer just a medical emergency or a tragedy of circumstance. It was now a full criminal case, built on nearly a year of forensic examination and legal review. But the road to justice would be long and uneven. Almost 5 years after Jasmine's case began, in June 2023, Jason Robin Jr. appeared in court and entered a guilty plea to murder. There was no trial, no public testimony. In exchange for cooperating with prosecutors, including testifying in Catherine's future trial, he accepted a 45-year prison sentence. Under Texas law, he must serve at least half that time before becoming eligible for parole. It was a negotiated end to a case that had haunted investigators, medical staff, and everyone who followed it. Prosecutors stated that if Jason hadn't accepted the deal, they would have pursued a harsher sentence. But his testimony would help them build the second case, the one still waiting. As of 2025, Catherine White has not gone to trial. Her attorneys continue to argue she had no knowledge of Jasmine's deteriorating health, no role in her injuries, and no intent to cause harm. Prosecutors contend that inaction in the face of warning signs, especially after a doctor's recommendation, constitutes legal responsibility. Her fate remains uncertain. Meanwhile, Jasmine's younger sibling, born in April 2019, was placed with Jason's parents. The hospital, aware of the pending investigation, worked with CPS to ensure the child was transferred directly to family upon discharge. The child remains there to this day. Privately, the grandparents kept pieces of Jasmine's short life close. Her lavender blanket, printed with soft butterflies, was carefully folded and tucked away. A small memory of a little girl who never got a chance to grow up. Jason Robin Sr., despite the unimaginable weight of his own son's actions, echoed a hard truth. If he's responsible, he has to face it. The family didn't stop loving Jason Jr., but they didn't excuse what happened either. Love and accountability, painfully coexisting. The plea from Jason brought legal closure to one part of the case. But closure is not resolution. Catherine's trial remains unresolved, and the system that missed so many warning signs has not offered reforms or public reckoning. There were no major policy changes after Jasmine's case. No agency held a press conference. No wide-scale procedural reforms were launched. For the public, it seemed like business as usual resumed. But buried inside the details are warnings we cannot afford to ignore. These red flags weren't buried. They were documented. A doctor's concern. A CPS report. A missed hospital visit. a prior arrest, a visible bruise. On their own, they may not have screamed danger, but together, they formed a pattern that demanded intervention, and still, no one connected them. Across the U.S., Child Protective Services receive thousands of reports every day. Some are valid, some are not. Many children fall through cracks when families move, avoid calls, or change addresses. Investigations close, not because the child is safe, but because the case becomes administratively unresolved. Jasmine's story shows us what happens when there's no second attempt, when no one rechecks, when no system flags multiple incidents across different timelines. And sometimes, the signs don't look urgent. A missed appointment, a feeding gone wrong, a baby unusually quiet. These aren't always emergencies, but they are reasons to look closer. If a pediatrician tells you to go to the ER, go. If something feels off, speak up. You don't need proof, just concern. Reports can be made anonymously. One voice can be enough to change a child's entire life. What makes Jasmine's story harder is that not all danger looks violent. Sometimes the abuser is someone known, trusted, even loved. That makes the signs even harder to accept. But we have to try, because a baby coming home from the NICU should be met with hope, not a countdown no one notices. Jasmine survived 72 days of fragility in the hospital, and yet she didn't make it 2 weeks at home. That is not just a tragedy, it is a failure. Jasmine's story is more than a warning, it's a responsibility. One we all share. So if this story moved you, share it. Leave a comment. Let others know her name. Jasmine Rose Robin. A name the system tried to forget, but we won't. Because the next child's life might depend on what we do today. What if a quiet town hides a terrifying secret? A child goes missing, and what seemed like an innocent disappearance soon uncovers something far darker. He had slipped through the cracks, living freely, hiding in plain sight. The unsettling discovery inside his home will shock you. A hidden pull string, a cookbook with strange recipes, and photographs that raise troubling questions. Zachary Ramsey's name. Vanished. A meat grinder, unusual material, and fragments that raise many concerns. But could they be connected to the child? Zach will never be found, scattered across different places. How did he remain undetected for so long? The story of Nathaniel Barjona will leave you questioning everything. Stay tuned, and don't miss what happens next. In December 1999, authorities in Great Falls uncovered a case that would leave the entire community shaken. What began as a routine search warrant for a man with a troubling past soon led to an unsettling discovery, one that no one had anticipated. Inside his home, investigators found evidence suggesting that something deeply disturbing had been happening right under their noses. Was this the work of a troubled individual, or had his darkest thoughts already turned into something far worse? To truly understand the depth of what was unfolding, we need to step back and examine the life of Nathaniel Barjona, a man whose past would send shockwaves through an entire town. But before we dive in, I just want to take a moment to thank all of you, my amazing viewers and subscribers, for your continued support. Your likes, shares, and comments help bring attention to these cases, and I truly appreciate each and every one of you. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our growing true crime community. Now, let's get into it. Nathaniel Barjona, born David Paul Brown on February 15, 1957 in Worcester, Massachusetts, appeared to be an ordinary child at first glance. Raised by his parents, Philip and Tyra Brown, he grew up in a strict household where discipline was a priority. But even from an early age, his behavior raised serious concerns. His childhood was marked by unusual and unsettling habits, actions that many brushed off as mere quirks or phases. However, as time went on, these tendencies only intensified, hinting at a much deeper issue. Just weeks after his birth, Nathaniel was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, a condition where excess fluid builds up in the brain, potentially affecting cognitive and emotional development. Although he eventually recovered, the long-term effects of this condition may have played a role in shaping his behavior. As a child, his actions often alarmed those around him, yet his mother seemed to overlook them. He developed strange tendencies, such as obsessively picking at his skin until it bled and then continuing to irritate the wounds as they healed. While some children outgrow odd habits, Nathaniel's behaviors only became more unsettling over time. His classmates were disturbed by his actions, and his teachers frequently reached out to his mother, hoping she would intervene. But Tyra largely dismissed their concerns, failing to recognize the severity of her son's struggles. This lack of intervention allowed his behavior to escalate, and the warning signs weren't just limited to odd habits, they became more aggressive. At the age of 7, Nathaniel lured a younger child into the basement of his home, claiming he wanted to show her a toy. But once they were alone, he attempted to harm her. The child's terrified screams alerted his mother, who arrived just in time to stop the situation from escalating further. Yet, instead of treating this as a serious warning sign, the incident was brushed aside as nothing more than a childish outburst. No legal action was taken, and no one seemed to recognize the potential danger. His father, Philip, was strict and believed in harsh discipline, punishing Nathaniel severely whenever he misbehaved. But rather than curbing his behavior, this approach seemed to fuel it. Instead of understanding consequences, Nathaniel became more defiant, and his actions grew increasingly concerning. By the time he turned 12, his troubling behavior escalated again. He began seeking out younger children, using deception to gain their trust. In one instance, he convinced a 6-year-old boy to follow him, pretending he had something fun planned. But what was supposed to be an innocent outing took a far more disturbing turn. Nathaniel hurt the child, an act that, at the time, went unreported. Once again, his parents chose to dismiss his actions, unwilling or unable to comprehend the seriousness of the situation. This cycle of neglect, paired with Nathaniel's deepening psychological issues, set the stage for what was to come. As he grew older, his actions became even bolder. By 17, Nathaniel was no longer just a troubled teen. He was actively seeking out new opportunities to deceive and control others. In one particularly unsettling incident, he attempted to manipulate 2 young boys into following him to a secluded area, promising them a fun adventure. But before he could carry out whatever he had planned, one of the boys sensed that something was off and managed to escape. Yet, despite how alarming the situation was, authorities failed to take serious action. The boy's parents chose not to press charges, and once again, Nathaniel slipped through the cracks of the justice system. Despite the growing number of red flags, he continued moving through life virtually unchecked, leaving a trail of unanswered questions in his wake. His childhood had been filled with warning signs, signs that no one had taken seriously. No one, that is, except Nathaniel himself. Because deep down, he knew exactly what he was capable of. As he entered adulthood, his behavior became even more reckless. At 17, he took his deception a step further by impersonating a police officer. Wearing a uniform and flashing a fake badge, he approached an 8-year-old boy named Richard O'Connor and convinced him to follow along. For hours, he kept the boy in his control, putting him through a terrifying ordeal. It was only by chance that a neighbor noticed something suspicious and alerted the authorities, leading to Nathaniel's arrest. But despite the severity of what had happened, the justice system failed once again. He was sentenced to probation, a mere slap on the wrist for actions that should have resulted in a much harsher consequence. Instead of learning from this, Nathaniel grew more emboldened. He moved between states, continuing to seek out new targets in Connecticut and Massachusetts. In 1977, he tricked 2 boys in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts into following him. Once again, he posed as a police officer, gaining their trust before leading them to an isolated location. There, he restrained them and subjected them to intense harm. One of the boys was nearly crushed as Nathaniel forced his full weight onto his chest, while the other, sensing the danger, pretended to be unconscious in an effort to survive. Eventually, Nathaniel abandoned one boy on the side of the road and drove away with the other in his trunk. It was an incident so shocking that authorities could no longer turn a blind eye. This time, he was sentenced to 18 to 20 years in prison. But even that felt like too little, given the extent of what he had done. While incarcerated, Nathaniel's disturbing thoughts only seemed to intensify. He openly discussed them with mental health professionals, his words so unsettling that officials eventually transferred him to Bridgewater State Hospital, a facility designed for individuals considered a serious risk to others. Despite this, the system still failed to recognize just how dangerous he truly was. In 1984, after a parole hearing, Nathaniel was released. And the horrors that followed would prove that this was a catastrophic mistake. Despite multiple warnings from specialists about the likelihood of repeat offenses, the legal system chose to overlook these concerns. After spending less than 10 years behind bars, Nathaniel was deemed rehabilitated, and a judge approved his release, a decision that would soon prove to have devastating consequences. With little oversight and no real safeguards in place, he was free to return to his old ways, continuing the troubling behavior he had exhibited for years. Nathaniel Barjona, previously known as David Brown, was released from Bridgewater State Hospital in 1991. He had spent several years under psychiatric supervision, yet despite persistent concerns about his mindset, officials concluded that he was fit to re-enter society. During his time in the hospital, he made the unexpected choice to change his name to Nathaniel Benjamin Levi Barjona. His reasoning was vague, but he later claimed that he wanted to experience discrimination firsthand, suggesting that this was his way of understanding historical oppression. However, there was no indication that he had any actual cultural or religious ties to the name. More likely, it was an attempt to reinvent himself, allowing him to distance his new identity from his troubling past. Even with clear warnings from mental health professionals, the parole board determined that Nathaniel had shown sufficient improvement to be granted release. They imposed a condition that he participate in outpatient treatment, but much like before, he disregarded any efforts to help him. Soon after, he relocated to Great Falls, Montana, where he moved in with his mother. For a short time, Nathaniel kept a low profile, blending into the community. However, this wouldn't last. It wasn't long before he fell back into familiar patterns. In 1991, outside a post office, he was caught attempting to lead a young boy away under false pretenses. Once again, he had assumed the identity of a police officer, an act he had used before to gain the trust of unsuspecting families. Fortunately, the boy's mother saw what was happening and intervened before anything could happen. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Nathaniel faced only probation. It was a remarkably lenient consequence for someone with his past, and one that allowed him to continue evading real accountability. After that, he seemed to disappear from public attention for a while, but beneath the surface, troubling signs continued to emerge. Neighbors reported odd behavior, though nothing that immediately warranted concern. During the 1990s, Nathaniel remained largely unnoticed, but his impulses had not faded. His ability to go undetected was merely a temporary calm before the inevitable storm. Behind closed doors, his troubling thoughts were growing stronger, and before long, he would set his sights on a new target. A young boy named Zachary Ramsey. Zachary, a 10-year-old from Great Falls, Montana, was well known for his friendly personality. He was bright, sociable, and well-loved by his teachers and classmates. On the morning of February 6, 1996, he followed his usual routine, heading off to school with the same energy and excitement as any other day. But that day would not be like the others. Zachary was last seen making his way down a snowy street, taking a shortcut through an alley that many children in the neighborhood used. He was dressed in his favorite blue denim jacket, a football jersey with his name on it, and black high-top sneakers. But somewhere along that alleyway, he simply vanished. The sudden disappearance of a child in broad daylight sent shockwaves through the community. Search efforts began immediately, with authorities, neighbors, and loved ones scouring the area for any sign of him. However, as hours turned to days, there was still no trace of Zachary. The growing urgency of the case led investigators to piece together witness accounts. Several people reported seeing an unfamiliar man in the alley that morning. He was described as wearing a dark-colored jacket, one that resembled a police uniform, and was walking closely behind Zachary. Another witness recalled a pale-colored four-door vehicle idling nearby. The presence of the car stood out, and its location so close to where Zachary had last been seen raised immediate suspicion. As the investigation progressed, an unsettling discovery was made. A jacket and a pair of jeans, identical to the ones Zachary had been wearing, were found discarded in a nearby dumpster. The discovery only deepened the mystery. Had someone left them there intentionally? Was it an attempt to mislead investigators? Or was it evidence of something far worse? As authorities followed these leads, one name kept coming up: Nathaniel Barjona. Multiple witnesses reported seeing him in the area that morning, and his past behaviors made him a person of interest almost immediately. Then came a breakthrough. One witness positively identified Nathaniel as the man seen following Zachary in the alleyway. This connection between Nathaniel and the disappearance was impossible to ignore. Given his prior offenses and well-documented history of deception, investigators knew they needed to take a closer look at him. His repeated pattern of impersonating law enforcement and targeting vulnerable individuals made him an obvious suspect. However, without concrete proof linking him to Zachary's disappearance, they had to tread carefully. As weeks passed, the investigation into Nathaniel's activities intensified. Law enforcement worked tirelessly to uncover more evidence, hoping to find anything that could provide clarity on what had happened to Zachary. What they would eventually find inside Nathaniel's home would send shockwaves through the entire community. By December of 1999, Nathaniel was arrested once again, this time for impersonating a police officer outside a local elementary school. It was a troubling reminder of his long-established patterns, and it reignited concerns about his true intentions. But as authorities dug deeper into his background, they would soon come to realize that this arrest was just the beginning of something far more disturbing. When authorities entered Nathaniel's home with a search warrant, they expected to find evidence of his troubling activities. However, nothing could have prepared them for what they uncovered inside. One of the first oddities they noticed was a pull string hanging from the kitchen ceiling. At first, it seemed unremarkable, but its placement raised immediate questions. Why was it there, and what was its purpose? This small detail would turn out to be just the beginning of a series of unsettling discoveries. As investigators combed through the house, they came across a cookbook unlike any other. The titles of the recipes were cryptic, yet deeply disturbing, hinting at a mindset far more sinister than they had anticipated. It was clear that these were not ordinary culinary notes, but rather a chilling reflection of Nathaniel's thoughts. More evidence emerged, reinforcing the grim picture. Over 3,500 photographs of children were discovered, along with undeveloped film. Some images appeared to feature children from Nathaniel's past interactions, further raising suspicions. Then came one of the most alarming finds, a handwritten list of names, including that of Zachary Ramsey. Next to Zachary's name was a single ominous word: gone. As the search continued, authorities discovered human hair inside a meat grinder in Nathaniel's kitchen. Although testing revealed it did not match Zachary's DNA, its very presence raised disturbing questions. Who did it belong to, and why was it there? Alongside this, small bone fragments were found, though they could not be conclusively identified. These discoveries only deepened concerns about what had taken place within those walls. But perhaps the most unsettling revelations came from those who knew Nathaniel personally. Neighbors recalled him frequently hosting cookouts, where he served homemade meals that, in hindsight, seemed oddly unfamiliar in taste and texture. When asked about it, Nathaniel claimed the meat was venison he had hunted himself. However, there was a problem. He had no hunting license and no known history of hunting at all. This contradiction, combined with the other discoveries, led to grim speculation about what may have actually been served. Further testimony came from Nathaniel's roommates. They recounted disturbing conversations in which he would reference Zachary Ramsey in unnerving ways. One roommate even claimed Nathaniel had once stated with unsettling certainty that Zachary would never be found, implying he had been permanently erased. The growing body of evidence painted a clear picture. Nathaniel Barjona had hidden in plain sight for years, slipping through the cracks of the justice system despite his disturbing past. With every new detail, investigators were left questioning how he had managed to remain undetected for so long. But even with mounting evidence, bringing Nathaniel to justice proved to be a complicated process. The case against him faced numerous legal challenges, and despite the overwhelming signs pointing to his guilt, direct, irrefutable proof remained elusive. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the case was the position taken by Zachary Ramsey's mother. Despite everything that had come to light, she refused to believe that her son was gone. A psychic had convinced her that Zachary was still alive somewhere, living under a different identity. This belief ultimately influenced the legal proceedings, and in the absence of conclusive physical evidence, the charges related to Zachary's disappearance were dropped. Although Nathaniel evaded conviction in Zachary's case, his history eventually caught up with him. In 1991, he was finally sentenced to 130 years in prison. However, even this was not without delays and legal battles, leaving many questioning why it had taken so long for justice to be served. Nathaniel spent the rest of his life behind bars, though his imprisonment did not bring full closure to those affected by his actions. Many questions remained unanswered, and the full extent of what had transpired under his watchful yet deceivingly ordinary exterior would never truly be known. He passed away in 2008, taking his darkest secrets with him. His case remains a chilling reminder of how predators can operate undetected and how gaps in the system can allow them to continue their actions for far too long. It also raises an important question. Are we doing enough to recognize warning signs and protect those who are most vulnerable? What do you think? Are the current safeguards in place enough to prevent cases like this from happening again? Or are there still blind spots that need to be addressed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.